the last few decades, guys and gals with mullets have known that whoever said you can't have it both ways is a liar. So lately, I've been on a mission to see if the same thing applies to a mullet on a bike as well. For those of you who aren't familiar, a mullet on a bike is a 27.5-inch wheel in the back and a 29er up front. So in theory, that should give you the best of both worlds, combining the 29-inch wheel with speed and control, as well as the 27.5 with playfulness and agility. To find out if the mullet setup was really all it was cracked up to be, I had to set a few benchmarks with my 27.5 in climbing, descending, and jumping. Next, I swapped my fork and front wheel for 29ers and did the same tests again. And don't worry, we're gonna get to those test results in a second, but first, I wouldn't be doing my due diligence if I didn't share some of the effects changing your wheel size really has on the rest of your bike. My size small Polygon Siskiyou T8 comes with a 27.5-inch wheel front and back. This means that to switch to a mullet, I had to install a new 29-inch front wheel and fork. In theory, you could do the same with a 29-inch wheeled bike by swapping the rear wheel for a 27.5, but most modern mountain bikes already have such low bottom brackets that this isn't really feasible. Mulleting a 27.5-inch bike actually raises the bottom bracket, since the front axle ends up being about an inch higher than it is in its stock configuration. There are also some bikes, like the all-new Siskiyou TE series, that have a flip chip that adjusts the geometry of the frame, allowing you to downsize the rear wheel without further dropping the bottom bracket. And changing the bottom bracket height isn't the only geometry number that mulleting a bike will affect. You'll also slacken the head tube and seat tube angle, increase the stack, and marginally reduce the reach. In order to help mitigate these changes, I chose to install a fork with 10 millimeters less travel than my 27.5-inch fork had, going from 150 millimeters to 140 millimeters. All in all, this change ended up slackening the head tube and seat tube angle by 1 degree, increasing the stack by 10 millimeters, and raising the bottom bracket by 10 millimeters. But that's enough technical jargon for the time being. If you have any other questions about some of the changes and effects that mulleting your bike might have, let me know in the comments and I'll do my best to answer. Meanwhile, let's get to the results. Like I mentioned earlier, I tested the bike in 3 different categories: technical climbing, descending, and jumping. The climb I chose was a 1/4 mile stretch of relatively technical terrain with a few tight corners and some chunky rocks. I completed the climb 4 times, keeping my fastest time with each wheel size. I immediately felt the difference in the mullet setup on my first climb. I was able to get up and over a few chunky sections a lot easier and felt I could leverage the front end a lot better. Oh, heck yeah! First try on that section at least. Keep going. It showed in the results too, because I ended up shaving 2 seconds off my climb with that mullet setup. Next up was descending, which is my all-time favorite part of mountain biking and what I tend to cater my bike setup towards. My test track was about a half-mile section of Black Diamond Trail, packed with roots, rocks, and loose, tight corners. Once again, I repeated this section of trail 4 times with each wheel size. On some of the rocky drop sections, I felt the benefit of the 29-inch front wheel, but as soon as I got to the steep hairpin corners, I wished I was back on the 27.5. Oh, shoot. Oh my gosh. That was even worse than the first one. I ended up being 2 seconds faster on the full 27.5 because of this. Though I'd imagine if it was a gnarlier, rockier course without those tight corners, the results might have looked different. The last thing we had to test was jumping. And just like I said about descending, having a bike that I really feel comfortable jumping is actually very important to me. Sadly though, quantifying how each wheel size performed in the jumps is a bit trickier than simply setting up a stopwatch. What I can tell you though is overall I preferred my 27.5, my original setup, to the mullet setup on the jumps. I ended up ranking it at 4.5 stars with my 27.5 and just 3 stars on that 29er mullet setup. I'm not sure if it had more to do with being accustomed to the original setup, but I felt a little clumsy on the mullet. It definitely started feeling better as I moved up to bigger jumps, so again, I'm guessing more of a bike park setting might have me favoring the mullet setup after all. All in all, it was a really interesting experience comparing the 2 different types of setups. Like I said in the beginning, I had never ridden a mullet setup before, so just kind of seeing where it shines and maybe where it leaves something to be desired was really helpful. To summarize, I found that in the climbing category, the mullet setup was definitely the ticket. As far as descending goes, I think that's going to depend a lot on the type of descent you're doing. With the tight corners I was practicing on, I definitely preferred the 27.5, but if it was more of a gnarly downhill, straight-on course, I think I'd go with the mullet. And finally, comparing the jumps, I definitely had a strong preference to my 27.5. I think just being a little more agile, picking up my speed in the berms, and just being able to pop a little easier felt better all in all. But I'm really intrigued to see how this mullet setup might do in a bike park, for instance. All that being said, I'm interested in keeping the mullet setup around a little bit longer and really seeing if I get any more insights over the course of a longer period of time. If you're interested in trying a mullet setup yourself, let me know in the comments and I'd love to answer any questions you have or kind of walk through the experience together. While you're down there, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Bikes Online channel, where we'll be hanging out, riding some fun bikes, and sharing the results with you guys. And after you've done that, get outside and get ripping.